All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the weekly webinar. I'm Kelly G. Loeb, your host for today. Thank you for being here. Happy Thursday afternoon. A few housekeeping things before we get going. Looks like everybody's on mute. And of course, we'll ask for you to stay muted throughout our time together today. If you have questions for our presenter, feel free to use the chat function. I'll watch that as we spend our time together, and we'll have time for questions before we're finished. And then it looks like at least a couple of folks have enabled the captioning. If you want closed captioning, there's a box at the bottom of your screen that says CC and show captions. So feel free to employ that as you need to. And we will have a wonderful conversation. A couple of other announcements I want to make while I have your what I hope is rapt attention. And that is, if you read this week's weekly My Alliance newsletter, and you are here not only for our presenter, but also to hear the answer to the bonus brain booster, I will reveal that now. And the bonus question was, in keeping with our topic, which of these animals sleeps the most? And your options are a koala, an elephant, or a giraffe. And I do not want to keep you in suspense any further. The answer to this question is that at 22 to 24 hours a day, a koala sleeps the most. Are you surprised? I was. I have no reason for any rationale. I assume maybe size of the animal may have something to do with it. Koala, out of a giraffe, an elephant, and a koala, the koala is the smallest. In comparison, an elephant sleeps 2 to 3 hours a day, and a giraffe clocks in at only 1.9 hours. So, I don't know, maybe our speaker might have some insight to that, no pressure. Anyway, so there's the answer to that. So thank you for reading the My Alliance newsletter. Thank you for participating in the Brain Booster. One more announcement is that we have another showing of Why, our documentary, 1 week from tonight. Maybe koalas get bored easily. They should listen to this webinar then, and they will never be bored. So thanks for that, Mike. I love it. We have the next screening of our Why movie a week from tonight, Thursday, April 20th, and that will be at the First United Methodist Church in Leavenworth. So just a little bit down the road from us. It is free to attend, starts right at 6 o'clock. The show runs for about 38 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions and comments afterwards. I will be there. I hope you will be too. I do not have a line on whether there will be popcorn, but it will be a good time. You'll love the movie if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it and you want to see it again, you're welcome to join us. More details will be in our next My Alliance newsletter coming out on Monday. And with that, I am going to turn the reins over to our presenter, but first I'm going to introduce her. And I will answer that question in the chat in just a moment. Dr. Katie Siengsukon is an associate professor of physical therapy, rehabilitation science, and athletic training, and she is the director of the Sleep, Health, and Wellness Laboratory at the KU Medical Center. Dr. Siengsukon's line of research seeks to understand how sleep impacts function, learning, and overall health, particularly with aging and in those with neurological conditions. And Dr. Siengsukon is board certified in behavioral sleep health. So I know that she will have us wide awake during our time together, telling us about myths about sleep health. So with that, I'm going to mute myself. Dr. Siengsukon, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you so much for the kind welcome and for having me here today. And I'm sorry, I'm presenting from my office and the afternoon light happens to hit my windows, and so I'm backlit. And so unfortunately, I don't have as great of lighting from the front of me. It's just the way my office is set up. So hopefully you can bear with me. But I don't know much about animal sleep. So I was actually curious on what the answer was myself. But if you do have more interest in sleep, I will say Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, is actually a fantastic read. I recommend that to a lot of my clients who have interest in learning more about sleep. And he actually has a whole chapter about the evolution of sleep, which is really fascinating. And in that, he includes about animal sleep and about how dolphins only sleep with one hemisphere at a time so they can keep swimming, and kind of other fascinating tidbits like that. But today I'm going to be talking about the myths of sleep health, and I'm again delighted to be here with you all today. I plan to present for 15-20 minutes-ish and then open up for questions after that. So myth number one, and just very briefly, I know Kelly kind of went through my background. So I am trained in behavioral sleep medicine. I specifically have been trained in a technique called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So we have several studies going on that use CBTI. And so I've worked with people with multiple sclerosis. We currently have a study in older adults. So I've worked with a lot of older adults who have various related sleep issues. And so these I feel like are the myths that I oftentimes hear in the clients that I'm working with. And so I thought that would be maybe interesting and useful information for you all. So maybe one of the myths that I hear is that nothing important happens during sleep. So it sure looks like you're just laying there, not doing much, taking it easy. But we really know that sleep is a very active time for our brains and for our bodies to heal. So there's actually a lot of things that are going on as far as that repair and that recovery processes for lots of different functions. And just here's a list of the different systems that sleep helps to support. And this isn't even all of them. But we know, like, for example, for your immune system, we know that there's certain immune cells that are more prolific during the day. There's certain immune cells that are upregulated that are more prolific at night. So if you're not getting adequate sleep, it actually can impact your ability to ward off infection and viruses. We also know that sleep's important for tissue healing. And so lots of these studies have been done in animals where they'll sleep deprive the animal and compare it to a non-sleep deprived group of animals. And they find that those animals who are sleep deprived are more likely to develop sores on their paws or their tails than those animals who are not sleep deprived. And so as a physical therapist, we see a lot of clients who have had some sort of an injury or have had surgery. And so to me as a clinician, that's so important, knowing that sleep is critical for that tissue and for that body to heal. We also know that sleep's very important for pain and regulating our response to pain. So when you're not able to get into that deep restorative stage of sleep, which we call slow wave sleep, it actually impacts the ability of the brain to regulate your perception of pain. So people who aren't getting adequate sleep, they have a higher pain perception, they have a lower pain threshold, maybe are indicating that they experience pain at lower levels. So really fascinating work going on the relationship between sleep and pain. We also know sleep's important for cardiovascular health. So when you get, again, into that deep restorative slow wave sleep, that's a period of time where you have a lowering in your heart rate, you have a lowering in your blood pressure. So it puts less strain and stress on that cardiovascular system. So if you're not getting adequate sleep, again, it just puts added strain on your cardiovascular system, which puts you at a higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease. We also know sleep's really important for cognitive function. And cognitive function refers to lots of different domains. So things like paying attention, being able to switch attention, being able to make higher level decisions, and sleep impacts each one of those domains. We also know that sleep's really important for learning and for memory consolidation. So there's been studies that have shown that what you learn during the day, in essence, gets replayed at night, which helps to strengthen that memory consolidation and holding those memories within your brain. We also know sleep's important for metabolic and endocrine functions. So if you're not getting adequate sleep, it puts you at a higher risk of developing diabetes and obesity. Of particular interest to me in my research lab is looking at how sleep is important, how it's neuroprotective, and how it can actually help you eliminate waste that can build up during the day. So one example is beta amyloid. That gets produced as a byproduct. And ideally, when you're in that deep slow wave sleep, there's an increase in fluid that flows through your brain, and it helps to clear out the beta amyloid. So if you're not getting adequate sleep, you're at a higher risk of that amyloid, the beta amyloid, staying in your brain and putting you at a higher risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. So we're using a strategy called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia to help people sleep better. And we're looking to see if does that improve cognitive function, and also does it reduce the rate of beta amyloid accumulation within the brain. We have about 1 more year to go on that 5-year study, but I'm really excited to see the results once we actually finish enrollment and are able to look at that analysis, because obviously that would be huge impact if we're able to support what we are hoping we'll see. Another myth that I see oftentimes in clients that I work with is that older adults need less sleep. And this is not true. The need for sleep does not change as you age. So the recommendation from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine is for adults to get at least 7 hours of sleep or more for adequate health. And it may be that if you do feel like you're getting less sleep or maybe you're needing more sleep, sometimes that can indicate that you possibly have some underlying health issue that could be going on. And I like this infographic because it helps to relay there are changes that happen in your sleep, but the need for sleep doesn't change. So on the top of this picture, it shows a stereotypical general 18-year-old. And if we look at his pie chart here, what we see is that about 50% of his night of sleep is by stage 2 sleep. And we'll talk a little bit more, I think, on the next slide about these different stages, but about 50%. And you'll notice that doesn't change in older adults as well. And he spends about 20%-ish in delta sleep, which is another word for slow wave sleep or that deep restorative stage of sleep. And so you will notice that there is, in general, a reduction in the amount of time that older adults spend in that deep slow wave sleep. So that is one change that we oftentimes do see in older adults. Another change that we see is you'll see for the stereotypical 18-year-old, he's not spending a whole lot of time awake throughout the night. And even if we look at the picture of these different sleep stages across the night, it looks like he's getting 8 hours of sleep, we see just a couple white bars indicating that he's becoming awake during the night, which is typical. People roll, people maybe have these micro arousals, that's normal. But what we see in this older gentleman that's lying here below, he's spending more time awake than what a younger adult would. And again, you see more of these white bars happening throughout the night, indicating these arousals are more prevalent throughout the night. And then the other change you'll see is an increase in stage 1. So where the younger adult is spending a very little amount of time in that stage 1 sleep, which is the very light stage of sleep that we go into when we first start to sleep. We see that older adults oftentimes spend more time in stage 1. So again, older adults often have more awakenings, they have more of that light stage 1 sleep and less of that deep stage 2 sleep. But I just want to illustrate here too, again, in this gentleman, he's getting 8.5 hours of sleep. So yes, duration of sleep is one thing that we think about, but we also want to think about quality sleep. Because again, he may be getting more duration than the younger adult at 8.5 hours, but looking at his sleep, I'd say, well, this isn't as great because he's having more awakenings in this picture here. So another myth that I oftentimes hear is that being able to fall asleep anytime, anywhere is a sign of a healthy sleep system. Not so. Oftentimes, if somebody is saying that they're falling asleep watching TV frequently, I've had some people say that they'll doze while they're waiting at a stoplight. Obviously, that's a big concern. But oftentimes that indicates that they're not getting adequate quality sleep at night, which again is a concern. And I oftentimes am thinking about, could there be an underlying sleep disorder? Could there be an underlying health issue that could be contributing to their disrupted sleep? And so what this picture shows is I think it's helpful to learn a little bit about what are the processes that underlie our sleep. And so for humans, we have two processes that drive our sleep. We have process C, which is our circadian rhythm. You've probably heard of that one before. And then process S is referred to as our sleep drive. And our circadian rhythm is regulated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus in our brainstem. And that tells a part of our brain to secrete melatonin, which has our brain switch from being awake from being asleep. So melatonin is a very potent hormone in humans. So process C is very important for our regulation of our sleep-wake cycle. And then process S, again, that sleep drive. So you can think of it as the longer you're awake, the more active and cognitively active you've been, the higher your sleep drive is going to be. So we want the circadian rhythm, we want the sleep drive to be super high so that people are going to be successful to sleep. And so oftentimes, if someone's able to fall asleep anywhere, anytime, usually that means that their process S is super high. and they're not getting adequate sleep at night to reduce the sleep drive. Because what should happen is you get into bed at, say, 11 o'clock in this picture, and in that sleep drive, we see a really significant reduction in the sleep drive. Then you wake up and you're trying to build the sleep drive back up the next day. Another myth, if you have difficulty falling asleep, it is best to stay in bed and try to fall back to sleep. And I love this picture because, here's this person laying here to say, you woke me to say this, and here's his brain, next to him, thinking about all these things that could be going on and waking him up and keeping him from falling back to sleep. And so in general, our recommendation is that if you aren't able to fall asleep within 15 or 20 minutes, and that's what feels like 15 to 20 minutes, because we of course don't want you staring at a clock, the general recommendation is actually to get out of bed and to go somewhere that you can do a relaxing, distracting activity. Because ideally, we want your brain to associate your bed with sleeping. We don't want your brain to associate the bed with this picture, with your brain thinking about all these things, worrying about all these things, having all these thoughts still going through your head, because then what can happen is then you get into bed and your brain is like, oh, this is the time to worry. This is the time to think about things. So we try to break that cycle. Of course, for some of our clients, if they have mobility limitations or we're concerned about fall risk, then those are the individuals that we actually say, don't get out of bed. We don't want to risk having you fall. And instead, we encourage them to do a relaxing, distracting activity in bed to help, again, retrain the brain to think bed equals sleep. So another myth, and this is a conversation that I have with quite a few of my clients. The myth is that alcohol before bed will improve your sleep. Not the case. It may help you relax and may help you fall asleep more quickly, but it's actually going to disrupt your sleep and make you wake up more often throughout the night. And so this is where I have the picture of what our typical sleep schedule, our sleep cycles look like. So for humans, we cycle through REM sleep, and then there's 3 stages of non-REM sleep. So stage 1 I had mentioned before, stage 2, stage 3, and that goes in level of depth. So stage 1 is the really light stage of sleep, all the way down to stage 3 is that deep restorative stage of sleep. And so as humans, we cycle through those different stages throughout the night, anywhere between 4 to 6 times, anywhere between 60 to 90 minutes. So here in this example, the person is going to sleep or going to bed at 11 p.m. and is waking up at 7 a.m. So they are in bed and they go and first spend a little bit of time of stage 1, which again is that first stage that we enter before we fall, or as we're falling asleep, then spend a little bit of time in stage 2, and then spends quite a bit of time in that deep stage 3 sleep. And then you'll see cycles back up to stage 2, spends a little bit of time in REM. So the REM is denoted with this little bit of a red line, and then they cycle back down into deep sleep. And then here he has a little awakening, but then quickly falls back to sleep in that deep stage. So what you'll notice is, yes, they're cycling through these different stages, but we spend more time in that deep restorative stage of sleep in the first half of the night, and more time in that those lighter stages and REM sleep in the second half of the night. So that's why it's actually harder for someone to wake you up in the beginning of the night than it is at the end of the night or early morning. And also, too, if you wake up in the early morning hours, you're more likely to remember your dreams, because most of our dreaming happens during REM sleep, and it's a lighter stage of sleep. So if you wake up, you're more likely to remember your dreams. But again, alcohol will actually disrupt your sleep, and you'll have more of these awakenings periodically throughout the night. And another myth, napping makes up for lack of sleep at night. So I teach in our physical therapy program. I hear this actually a lot from our students that, oh, I stayed up all night studying last night, or I didn't get much sleep last night, because I'm studying for a test. That's okay. I'll just nap today and make up for it. And it's like, well, yes and no. You can't actually make up for the processes that should have happened while you didn't get enough sleep last night. But yes, it may help with your brain fog. It may help enhance your performance, but it's not going to actually make up for your lack of sleep last night. And so here's what happens though when people nap. And this is why napping, we oftentimes encourage people to either try to avoid napping or if you do need to take a nap, to try to take it as early in the day as possible, because I mentioned sleep drive, right? We want that sleep drive to build up during the day. So then when you get into bed at night, you fall asleep really quickly and easily because that sleep drive is super high. Well, if you take a nap, it's going to reduce your sleep drive. You're going to have a dip in that sleep drive. And so just know that if you do take a nap, you likely are going to have to delay your bedtime so there's sufficient time for that sleep drive to build back up so it's adequately high for you to fall asleep quickly and easily. But just to reiterate, yes, it may help kind of with your performance. It may help kind of with a little bit with that cognitive fatigue, but you can actually make up for the processes that should have happened the night before. And then the last myth, and this is, well, I'll wrap up and then I'll take some questions. So myth number 7, and this is really what we focus most on within my lab, is the myth that sleep issues are a normal part of aging. There's not much I can do about it. And this is something that I really want to break this myth, because sleep issues are not a normal part of aging. Like I mentioned, your need for sleep doesn't change. Yes, we see some characteristic changes in sleep architecture, but having sleep issues is not normal. And so I encourage clients to talk to their physician to see if there's an underlying sleep issue, if there's an underlying medical condition. Oftentimes medication can also be disrupting sleep, but just know there often are things that can be done to address those sleep issues. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those here as well. So these are the pillars of sleep health promotion. And so we try to address with all of our clients these 4 pillars. So we want to train circadian rhythm. So I mentioned it, circadian rhythm and sleep drive are the 2 processes that drive our sleep as humans. So we want that circadian rhythm to be as strong as possible. We want our sleep drive to be as high as possible. But we also want to reduce pre-sleep arousal. And I mean kind of that nervous system activity, that brain activity that just our brains want to run and won't turn off. Because you can have a really strong circadian rhythm, you can have a really high sleep drive, but if you can't calm your body and you can't calm your brain, then those 2 processes aren't going to be able to be effective. So we also spend a lot of time with our clients working on reducing pre-sleep arousal. And then the 4th bucket or 4th pillar, we refer to as sleep hygiene. And these are kind of all the other things like avoiding alcohol, avoiding nicotine, those sorts of things. And I have that in an etched line because typically, yes, we want to talk about them and yes, we want to address them if they're present, but they are not usually the sole factors influencing someone's sleep health. Usually it's circadian rhythm, sleep drive, or arousal issue. But yes, we'll also mention and talk about sleep hygiene as well. So what are ways that you can entrain your circadian rhythm? So one of the best things that you can do is have a regular sleep cycle. And I always emphasize a regular wake-up time with my clients because if you have a regular wake-up time, what's going to follow and develop is a regular bedtime. And the reason why regular wake-up time is key is exposure to light, and ideally exposure to sunlight, because there's a direct connection from your eye to that area of the brain that's secreting melatonin that tells your brain, hey, it's time to stop secreting melatonin and it's time to wake up. So ideally making your bedroom or where you're sleeping as dark as possible. And then when you wake up in the morning, expose yourself to bright light. That will help train your circadian rhythm. The way that we increase sleep drive, and I think about this as like a balloon, or you can think about that picture where you want the sleep drive to be super high. So I've already talked about this concept of stimulus control, meaning we want your brain to associate the bed with sleep. So if you're tossing and turning, ideally you're getting out of bed if it's safe to do so. We've talked about limiting naps if possible, because again, if you want that sleep drive to be high and then you take a nap, it's going to make the sleep drive dip. But just know that if you do take a nap, you may have to delay your bedtime later than you typically would. And then of course, physical activity and exercise, you all know that's good for you. It's also good to help your sleep as well. And it helps by increasing your sleep drive. And then the ways that we reduce pre-sleep arousal, I encourage my clients to develop a relaxing bedtime routine. So just like we want the brain to associate the bed with sleep, this bedtime routine also tells the brain that what comes next is going to be the bed, which equals sleep. And it also allows us a time to calm our bodies and to calm our brains so the circadian rhythm and the sleep drive can do their thing. And then I also focus on relaxation techniques with my clients throughout the day. because yes, sleep oftentimes happens during the nighttime hours, but our whole day is 24 hours. So what we do during the day is going to matter. And ideally, we're not waiting till right before bedtime to think about how do we manage our stress, our worry, those sorts of things. So I have clients practice during the day. And then as far as sleep hygiene, so those are thinking about your environment, try to keep your sleeping environment dark, cool, calm, and quiet. We talked about limiting caffeine, limiting alcohol, and avoiding large meals because that can upset your stomach and make it difficult to sleep. And then avoiding excessive liquid. Yes, by all means, stay hydrated, but not consuming more liquid than you need to reduce the number of times having to get up to use the restroom. And I will go ahead and stop there and open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Siengsukon. There's a question in the chat from Mike that says, I've read about the internal clock our brains have. Can that affect our sleep cycle? And can Parkinson's or Alzheimer's alter the brain such that it can affect the internal clock? If yes, in what ways? And also, does lack of sleep go hand in hand with quality of sleep?
Lots of questions in there. So our internal clock is that circadian rhythm. And so our internal clock, what we would refer to that as our suprachiasmatic nucleus. That's that master internal clock within our brain that it regulates not only our sleep, but it actually regulates all of our hormones. So it regulates your fullness hormones, I'm not full anymore, all of our hormones in our body. And so melatonin obviously is the potent one for our sleep-wake cycle. And so yes, there is some evidence that for individuals who have Parkinson's disease, oftentimes they have a disorder called REM behavior sleep disorder. And actually that sleep disorder seems to be a precursor for the development of Parkinson's disease. So REM behavior sleep disorder is a disorder where people act out their dreams because they don't have muscle atonia when they have REM. And we talked about how most of our dreams happen in REM. And so, yeah, so by, the issues that happen with Parkinson's, the reduction in dopamine that gets secreted with Parkinson's and how that impacts the circuits within our brain can absolutely impact sleep as well. And then with Alzheimer's disease, I'm particularly interested in that concept of when you get that deep restorative sleep, it helps to flush out beta amyloid. So yeah, so we're looking at, again, these are in our study, we're enrolling older adults that don't have Alzheimer's disease in the hopes that if we can help them sleep better earlier on, will that impact cognitive function and will that impact beta amyloid accumulation? Because yes, as you accumulate beta amyloid and as you develop Alzheimer's disease, that actually can impact those areas of the brain that regulate our sleep. So it kind of becomes like a vicious cycle in some ways. And then the other question was, how does lack of sleep go hand in hand with quality sleep? So I think of sleep as sleep duration, which is fairly easy to quantify, right? Like, oh, I got 6 hours of sleep or I got 8 hours of sleep. Whereas quality sleep is oftentimes more of a perception, right? We do have some objective ways that we refer to as sleep quality, but you can get 8 hours of really poor quality sleep, right? Or you could get 8 hours of really great quality sleep. And so we measure both usually, both duration and also sleep quality. And we measure quality in, like I said, a couple different ways, both with questionnaires. We also use wearables to assess quality as well.
Excellent. Okay. Jay is wondering about a study saying people who have trouble staying asleep are not at higher risk for dementia compared to people who have trouble falling asleep. Are you familiar with that study?
Let's see. So if you have trouble staying asleep versus trouble falling asleep. I don't know that I've read that particular study. I'd be curious on kind of their rationale for that, of course. Oftentimes there's a difference in, because when we work with people with insomnia, that could mean they have difficulty falling asleep, they have difficulty staying asleep, or they wake up too early. So that there's actually kind of three different kind of phenotypes or three different types of insomnia, if you will. And I would suggest that the people who have difficulty falling asleep, that oftentimes are people who are more anxious, they're more worried, they can be really tired, but they just can't turn their brains off. versus those people who have trouble staying asleep. Those are oftentimes people who might have, undiagnosed sleep apnea. They might have some other medical conditions. So it may be a factor of like what's contributing to those different sleep issues that may be contributing. But yeah, that's interesting. I haven't seen that yet.
That's,
Can I
yeah, it's a good segue to the next question, which is about the relationship between sleep apnea and dementia.
Yeah. So yes, there is a relationship between sleep apnea as well. Obviously, I've talked a lot about insomnia because that's the clients that I typically work with. The interesting thing about sleep apnea is that yes, you have, and so for people, a lot of you probably are familiar with sleep apnea, but that's where you can have either closures of the airway, so you're not getting sufficient oxygen while you're sleeping, and that can happen multiple times throughout the night. Or you can have central apneas, where that's actually usually people who've had like a stroke or have multiple sclerosis or other neurologic condition, where it actually impacts the brain's ability to tell your body to take a breath. So there's a couple different types of sleep apnea, but the most common is that obstructive, where you actually have closure of the airways. And so yes, they have these, they actually oftentimes have longer sleep duration. So this would be a good example for that other question is they could sleep 8, 9, 10 longer hours, but their sleep quality is terrible because they're having these apnea and hypopnea events throughout the night. So they have lots of awakenings throughout the night. So of course they're not getting adequate duration. They're not getting, quality sleep. They're not getting adequate restorative sleep. But there's also, because of those frequent arousals, there's also free radicals that are produced as well that cause different activities in the brain that contribute to dementia in a different way than insomnia would or other sleep disorders would. So it's similar, but then there's also these differences because of the apneas as well. Obviously, if you find that you are having those, if you're a bed partner that your bed partner is having where they stop breathing or they have really shallow breathing or they're waking up throughout the night, encouraging them to see their physician for further assessment, because oftentimes a CPAP or an auto-PAP machine to help keep the airway open is really very effective. And there's actually been studies that show that can improve cognitive function in people, in older adults.
Great. So we have 2 questions left in the chat. Dr. Siengsukon, if you are available to do those 2,
Sure.
and then we'll wrap up for the day. So the first question is about the Fitbit. It's not from me, but I do have one. So if you could talk about whether that gives a realistic assessment of our sleep quality. And then Carol wants to know what variation in sleep length is normal. And she says that she always falls asleep when trying to meditate, so she quit trying. So if you could address those, that would be really great.
Yeah, sure. So Fitbits or other commercially available wearables, I'll throw those all kind of in this question as well. So my general concern with commercially available wearables, so things like Fitbits, but there's obviously other companies, is that most of them have not been compared to our gold standard sleep study, which would be your overnight sleep lab study or polysomnography. Now that being said, some have, and actually some of Fitbit's models have. The other challenge is that once, even if there is a study that has compared it to an overnight sleep study, these wearables are evolving so quickly that by the time they've done the study to show that it's an accurate measure, they're already on to the next, iteration of that wearable. So that's just a little bit of caveat is that not all of them have been compared. So like we don't use them in our research studies because we're not as confident in their accuracy. But I will say that there's the utility in kind of following, like looking at the patterns, right? Like I think it's perfectly reasonable to look at your information, look at your sleep duration, and they do generally a good job of looking at like, are you awake or are you asleep? I will say that if you have a type that looks at your sleep stages, that's almost like flipping a coin. They're not very good at looking at sleep stages. So I generally don't worry too much about that, but I look at it more as far as kind of sleep wake cycle over time, sleep duration over time. And honestly, I'm happy to have conversations with people. Like, so when people come in with, my Fitbit told me this, it opens a conversation that maybe I wouldn't have been able to have otherwise. So I definitely see the utility in that as well. And as far as what variation in sleep length do I think is normal? So, so again, in general, the recommendation from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine is 7 or more hours of sleep. They took off the upper cap, so it used to be like 7 to 9 hours was the recommendation, and now it's 7 or more. That being said, I think there's still some evidence that would suggest that like 7 to 9 hours is probably the typical norm. Because once you get beyond like 9 hours of sleep, it oftentimes indicates that there's an underlying either sleep disorder or health issue that is causing an increase in your need for sleep duration. Now, that being said, I don't want anybody to panic either, because we all have a different sleep need as well. And so some people have less sleep need, some people have more. That's why this is all based on averages of the entire population, right? Like you may be on the short end of the average, or you may be on the long end of the average. And I'll end with, if you are concerned about your sleep, obviously these are great questions to ask, and following up with your physician about what is best for you, and what maybe treatments or discussions you need to have. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I did see one last question, if you have time, and that's about using melatonin. Any concern with using melatonin?
This won't be a quick one.
I didn't think so.
So I will, and I won't just say yes. But yes, I do. And there's several reasons, and I'll try to keep it brief. One of the big reasons is that most people in the United States take melatonin over the counter. And there was a study that was done that looked at the potency of over-the-counter melatonin and found high variability in the actual amount of melatonin that is actually in those supplements. And because in the United States, melatonin it can be sold as a supplement, it has different oversight from the FDA than like a medication would. So that's one big thing, is that you don't actually know how much melatonin you're getting when you take over-the-counter melatonin. Of course, some are better than others. But that's one big concern. My other big concern is that people are oftentimes taking it for the wrong reason. So melatonin, yes, can be very effective for people who have a circadian rhythm issue. So if you remember, I talked about how melatonin is the potent hormone that regulates our circadian rhythm. So for people who have either a shifted circadian rhythm, either too early or too late, then we treat that by melatonin, and we treat that with light and dark. But you have to really be diligent about the timing of both of those, or you can actually make the circadian rhythm issue worse. And so there's less evidence that melatonin is effective for things like insomnia. So I see people taking it for the wrong reason. And then the other big thing, well, two last things, and then I'll stop. The other big thing is that people take it at the wrong time. So I oftentimes see people taking it like right before they go to bed, but it actually takes some time for the melatonin to get into your bloodstream, to get up into your brain, to enhance the melatonin that your brain's already producing. And so the recommendation is actually to take melatonin like 4 to 6 hours before your intended time to fall asleep. So not right when you're trying to fall asleep, but actually 2 to 4 hours ahead of time. And then maybe my big thing that I'll end on is just my philosophical belief that like we as humans, our brains, we are made to sleep. And so I also am just concerned when people feel like they have to take a medication in order to sleep. Now, that being said, there's certain appropriate uses of medication. I don't want it to sound like I'm anti-medication or anything. But we are meant to sleep. And so if people are taking the melatonin as like a crutch, or the sense that like I can't sleep without it, that's really when I start to get concerned about it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You bet.
For such a great conversation about sleep. I know I learned lots of things. I wish everybody sweet dreams tonight. And I will say that if you're thinking about your sleep habits, remember that you are somewhere between a koala and a giraffe. And that's a pretty wide range, I think, in behavior. That's meant to be, encouraging from the social worker here. Thank you, Dr. Siengsukon, for sharing your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, this recording will be available online within about 24 hours. So if you'd like to go back and review it, it will be available. And I will put another plug in for Reading Your Mind Alliance newsletter every week, and sending your questions or comments to us for what you'd like to know more about. So I will go ahead and wrap us up for today. And Faith, again, I see your question is why available other than in person? Not currently. It's only available at one of our upcoming screenings, but we do plan to make it available online and in the future. And when I tell you in the future, it's not because I'm being coy. We don't know yet when that's going to be, but it is coming. So stay tuned. Okay. So with that said, everybody have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next Thursday. Bye-bye.